The New York City subway system can be a terrifying place, even for some like me who has spent 7 years working for the MTA. Though I've seen my fair share of bizarre incidents, one particular experience stands out, etched in my memory like it happened yesterday. This occurred about 2 years into my tenure while I was stationed in Brooklyn, performing routine maintenance at High Street Station. The platform was utterly deserted, a stark contrast to the usual hustle and bustle. The eerie silence enveloped me, broken only by the buzzing lights and the occasional rumble of passing train. Suddenly, a loud clang echoed through the tunnel, jarring me from my focus and causing me to drop my mop. It was an unfamiliar sound, reminiscent of a rock hitting metal, a noise that sent a chill down my spine. I strained my ears, hoping to discern the source, but the silence returned. Perhaps it was just an animal or debris fallen. I reasoned, and I went back to my tasks. But then, it happened again, this time twice as loud. Unease settled in my gut as I thought about the possibility of 2 pieces of the ceiling collapsing in quick succession. Setting aside my tools, I cautiously approached the tunnel entrance. I hesitated, debating whether to call out. Ultimately, my curiosity won, and I shouted into the darkness, but there was no response at all. Just when I thought I could shake off the oddities of the day, a child's voice cut through the silence, calling out for help, laced with desperation. My heart raced as I sprinted to the edge of the platform. I shouted back, asking if the child was okay, but there was no reply. Panic set in when the voice called out again, repeating its plea. "Yes, I can hear you," I yelled, urgency in my voice. "Where are you?" The answer sent a shiver through me. "In front of you. Just keep walking." A surge of dread washed over me. What kind of situation was I stepping into? I hesitated a bit, but the thought of leaving a child in distress was unbearable. I took a cautious step forward, but a new realization struck me. I yelled again, asking what was wrong. The child's response was chilling. "Just keep walking." By now, the darkness ahead was starting to reveal more than I wanted to see. I could make out a shadow, what seemed like a small child standing just beyond my reach. But right next to it was a taller shadow, a figure of an adult looming ominously. My blood ran cold. This was not happening. I turned slowly, my instincts screaming at me to get out. As I hurried back towards the platform, the child's voice rang out behind me, pleading, "Wait, where are you going?" But I didn't look back. I bolted up the stairs, my heart pounding. And once I had service, I called the police. Within minutes, officers swarmed the station, and I anxiously awaited their findings. After an exhaustive search of the tunnel, they uncovered something chilling. A single child's shoe lying on the tracks, suggesting something sinister might have transpired. Hours passed as they resourced databases for missing children, assuring we would be notified if anything surfaced. As the night wore on, the realization hit me hard. What if the child's voice had been a trap? I mean, was it a desperate call from a kid coerced by some twisted individual? My imagination raced as I considered the horrifying implications. Whoever had been down there could still be lurking in the dark tunnels, hidden from sight. The thought of what that child might have been going through haunted me, leaving a chilling imprint on my mind that I would never forget. It was a hot summer night when my best friend Ricardo and I, both 19, decided to escape our luxurious lives in North Jersey and enjoy the summer vibes at the Jersey Shore. My place in Belmar was cozy, but Ricardo's house in Lavalette had a chill, party-ready atmosphere that always drew me in. One evening, as we drove the hour-long stretch from my house to his, we tossed around ideas for the night. Rather than hitting up a wild party, we craved a more laid-back vibe, just some beers, a joint, and a private beach where we could kick back under the stars. After a few drinks at Ricardo's place, we grabbed some bikes from his garage and set up towards our chosen beach. As we pedaled, Ricardo led the way, choosing a secluded spot that seemed eerily quiet. The houses were dark, their lights off, and not a soul in sight. The desolation was comforting, perfect for a late-night escapade. We stashed our bikes under some shrubs and made our way to the beach, feeling the cool sand beneath our feet with the sound of waves crashing around us. We were lit up, laughed, and soaked in the night sky, hoping to catch a shooting star. But then we heard it, a faint metallic buzzing sound that sent chills down my spine. It was barely noticeable at first, reminiscent of the hum of fluorescent lights in a gym. But as we sat there in the dark, it grew impossible to ignore. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as Ricardo and I exchanged uneasy glances. What was that noise? Our laughter faded into nervous whispers, and our eyes darted around, scanning the shadows. Then, just as we decided to leave, the sound escalated from a soft buzz to a deafening roar. Panic surged through me. I could feel my heart racing as we jumped to our feet. The noise was closer now, a sinister presence lurking in the darkness. We bolted towards the sand dune, not knowing what we were running from, but desperate to escape. Halfway to safety, Ricardo stopped me with a firm grip on my shoulder. I followed his gaze in frozen terror. At the peak of the dune stood a dark figure, impossibly tall, with arms that seemed to stretch towards its knees. Its stillness was haunting, sending a wave of dread through me. "Run!" Ricardo shouted, pulling me back to reality. We sprinted parallel to the beach, desperate for escape. When we reached the next dune, we dared to look back, and what we saw literally froze my blood. The first figure remained at the top, but now there were 3 or 4 others, all eerily still, facing us. Their dark silhouettes loomed in the moonlight, and we didn't dare linger. We didn't even think about our bikes. We just ran. The adrenaline was pushing us all the way home. The following morning, we retraced our route, heart pounding with fear. But the bikes were gone, perhaps stolen or worse, taken by whatever had stalked us the night before. To this day, I can't really shake the unsettling feeling of that night. The buzzing sound remains a mystery, and I've never encountered anything like it again. The memory of those dark figures on the dune haunts me, a chilling reminder of the dangers that lurk in the shadows, waiting for an unsuspecting victim. Beaches have always instilled a sense of dread in me, a fear that roots itself in an unforgettable childhood experience. As a kid, I eagerly anticipated summer weekends spent at our beach house, or if I was lucky, at my friend Charles' beach house in Long Beach Island. It was the summer when I was 6, and excitement bubbled in the air as Charles, our mutual friend, Riley, and I prepared for a weekend of unsupervisioned fun at Charles' place. Riley, who had just gotten his driver's license, was in the driver's seat, and his unsteady driving made for a hilarious ride down. We laughed uncontrollably as we swerved and cursed at the road, making the trip feel quick and exhilarating. Once we arrived, we rushed to unpack our things in the cozy beach house. Taking note of the layout, the house had a front door, a garage door, and a back sliding door leading to a deck that connected to the upstairs bedrooms. Most importantly, the back faced a narrow lagoon, offering us a perfect view of the dark waters. The 3 of us were at the age where chasing girls consumed our thoughts. With a beach house all to ourselves, we couldn't resist the urge to invite some girls over. After some messaging, we managed to convince 3 cute girls, Rosie, Alexa, and Sophie, to come hang out with us. We had stocked up on enough alcohol, pilfered from our parents to fuel our wild weekend. As the night unfolded, we all jumped into Charles' small backyard pool, the steam rising and the gentle breeze mixing with the sweet smell of smoke from our joints. We were blissfully carefree until Charles suddenly turned the music down, his eyes fixed on something in the darkness across the lagoon. Confused, I turned to see what had captured his attention, but the shadows obscured any details. "Why do you turn it down?" one of the girls asked. Charles whispered that he saw someone standing on the dock across the way. I left it off, thinking he was just trying to scare us. After all, people lived there. But Charles insisted. "I know that family. They're supposed to be in Florida." A chill crept up my spine, but I brushed it aside, dismissing the unease. The girls, however, seemed unnerved, and when they expressed a desire to go inside, I was ready to agree. We climbed out of the pool and started drying off. But then Riley suddenly jumped, his face pale. "Look!" he exclaimed, pointing towards the lagoon. We all turned to see movement at the dock, and as a car passed by, its headlights briefly illuminated the horrifying sight. There were 4 tall figures standing at the edge of the dock, their shapes indistinct but menacing, and they were definitely facing us. "Come on, everybody, get inside!" Charles shouted, his voice trembling. Panic surged as we rushed into the house. The tension thickened the air. Just then, we heard a series of splashes echoing behind us. They were swimming across the lagoon, and that's when pure terror took hold of us. The girls screamed as Riley slammed the sliding door shut and locked it, while Charles hurried to secure the front door. We scrambled to hide in a room out of sight, our hearts pounding in silence, waiting for the next sound to reveal what was happening outside. Moments stretched into eternity until Riley suddenly cursed, realizing he had forgotten to lock the sliding door on the deck. Charles' eyes widened in horror as he grasped the reality of our vulnerability. Just then, we heard a soft, unnerving sound of footsteps above us. That was it. The fear kicked into overdrive. With no weapons and fueled by adrenaline, we sprinted for the front door. Bursting into the night, Riley scrambled to start a car, his nerves making him reckless as he smashed into Charles' mailbox while fleeing. Once we were far enough away, we called the police, the chaos still fresh in our minds. When the authorities arrived and searched the house, we discovered the shocking truth. Some items from the top floor had vanished, but that wasn't even the worst part. Charles' family boat, a medium-sized Boston whaler, had also been stolen, most probably used as a getaway vehicle. The police speculated that the thieves had used a spare set of keys Charles' father kept hidden under the steering wheel. As we processed the horror of the night, the nagging question remained: how did he know where the key was? The police were unable to catch the culprits, leaving us haunted by the idea that the robbers might have known Charles' family personally. It's been years since that terrifying event, but literally, guys, not a day goes by that I don't double-check every lock in my home. Trust me, you should do the same. Lock your doors at night, because you never know who might be lurking in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. At 25 years old, I lived in a beach town, just a short 20 minutes walk from the shore. My life revolved around the ocean. 80% of my personality was beach-related. I had been surfing since I could talk, and sand was a permanent fixture in my shoes. My two best friends, Armin and Chuck, were charismatic extroverts, and we were all obsessed with girls. One Saturday night in late May, just a few weeks before graduation, my friends and I were ready to push our luck. With college acceptance already in hand, we were done worrying about high school. That evening, Armin and I planned to pick up girls from our high school, and that was Sophia and Fran. We had blankets and bottles of wine, ready for a perfect night of stargazing on the beach. Arriving at Sophia's house just as after 9 p.m., I noticed that she and Fran had clearly pre-gamed a bit. Armin and I exchanged excited glances. It was going to be an unforgettable night. I chose a scenic beach about a 30-minute drive away, far from the crowds, ensuring a clear view of the stars. We parked as close as we could to the beach and grabbed our supplies. After a few hours of laughter and an empty wine bottle, Armin and Fran wandered off down the beach, while Sophia and I drifted in the opposite direction. The darkness wrapped around us, and we eventually collapsed onto a blanket, intoxicated and relaxed. But then, Sophia tensed up beside me. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. I strained to listen, dismissing her as just tipsy, but soon I heard it too, a strange, whirring sound like a smoke engine buzzing nearby. It flickered in and out, then faded away into silence. I reassured her it was nothing and tried to get back to our moment. But just then, Sophia shrieked, pointing at the sky. I was all confused. I turned to follow her gaze and froze in terror. Hovering above us, perfectly silhouetted against the moon, was a drone. It hovered for a moment before zipping off into the darkness. Suddenly that eerie whirring made sense. My stomach dropped at the thought of being watched the whole time. I glanced at Sophia, and her face mirrored my horror as she broke down in tears. I tried to console her, but we both know we had to leave. We hurried back to the car, where Armin and Fran were already waiting, looking stunned. I quickly explained what had happened, and the joy we had felt just moments ago vanished into the night air. The drive back was silent, tension thick in the car as I attempted to lighten the mood. But it was clear that the girls didn't feel safe going home. It was a Saturday night, so I didn't mind staying out late. I suggested we hang out at one of our houses, but their parents wouldn't allow it. As a last resort, Armin called Chuck, whose house was large and perfect for a group. To our relief, Chuck was free. I parked in Chuck's driveway, but as I stepped out, unease settled in. I needed a moment to process everything. Leaning my forehead against the steering wheel, I closed my eyes, but when I finally glanced at my phone, horror washed over me. A notification lit up the screen. It was literally saying this: AirTag found moving with you. Panic surged through my body as I realized we were being tracked. I leaped from the car, frantically searching every inch of it. Nothing on the bumpers, nothing under the seats. Sweat dripped down my back as I dropped to my hands and knees, inspecting the undercarriage. When I reached the driver's side tire, my fingers brushed against something. A small device tapped to the inside of the wheel well, nearly impossible to spot it. My heart raced as I ripped the airbag from its hiding place and crushed it underfoot. Whoever had been watching us knew exactly where we were. I was so terrified as I sprinted to the front door of Chuck's house, breathlessly explaining what I had found and showing them the shattered remains. Everyone's face paled, and the gravity of the situation hit us all. The girls checked their phones, confirming they had received the same alarming notification. Chuck was furious. We had unwittingly led a predator to this house. After a night spent in Chuck's basement, we tried to forget the horror, rationalizing that some creep wanted to spy on us. At the beach, it was chilling, but we felt relief that it hadn't escalated. 3 weeks later, on a quaint Sunday morning, I received a frantic call from Chuck. "Get to my house now," he shouted, panic in his voice. I rushed over, finding him in his driveway, a look of dread on his face, clutching a stack of papers. As I stepped closer, my stomach twisted in knots. They weren't just papers, they were photos. Grainy, dimly lit images of me and Sophia on the beach that night. I felt sick. The reality of being watched turned into the nightmare of being photographed. How would Sophia react? We called the police, who said there was little they could do. We insisted they check for fingerprints, but nothing turned up. Sophia was terrified, fearing black men, and I felt the same. The trauma of the experience lingered, but thankfully nothing more came of it. Probably because we involved the police. Still, the tension between us changed. Sophia was never quite the same around me after that night. I could only hope those photos wouldn't resurface, haunting us in the future. I have been a trucker for nearly 15 years, and what happened to me in 2017 is an experience I'll never forget. I was making an overnight haul through the Mojave Desert in California, heading to a destination in Arizona, delivering appliances, or at least that's what I think I was doing. It was pitch black, with darkness stretching in every direction, and my semi's headlights were dim and flickering. I had been menacing to get them fixed, but I'd put it off for too long, with hardly any other cars on the road. The poor visibility made me squint to see the road ahead. As the hour dragged on, I contemplated pulling over to wait for dawn, but the thought of losing precious time, money I desperately needed, kept me going. The road ahead was straight shot, so I convinced myself it would be fine. About an hour before sunrise, something caught my eye in the distance, an approaching light that seemed to be moving quickly. I panicked and I slammed on the brakes, my truck screeching on a halt just a foot from a car parked in the middle of the road. Its hazard lights blinked ominously, and the passenger door hung wide open. Curiosity piqued, and I carefully reversed and pulled over. I thought maybe someone needed to jump or was in some kind of trouble. As I got out, I noticed how still the night was. No wind, no sounds, just that faint clicking of the hazard lights cutting through the eerie silence. The car was a shiny red Ford Fusion, and I approached cautiously. To my shock, when I peeked inside, it was completely empty. I checked the back seat, the front, and there was no sign of anyone. Unease settled in my stomach, and I felt as if eyes were watching me from the shadows of the desert. I glanced around nervously, scanning the dark for any signs of life, but the only thing illuminated was my truck's headlights, cast in long shadows. Against my better judgment, I decided to investigate further. I looked in the car again, and everything seemed normal. The keys were in the ignition, but the engine was off. I approached the trunk, hoping to find some answers. It was locked, but I grabbed the keys and managed to unlock it. To my dismay, the trunk wouldn't open. It was jammed from the inside. I tried to access it through the back seat, and to my surprise, it opened easily. As I reached inside, I noticed 3 squishy garbage bags and a length of rope binding the truck shut. Just as I leaned closer, the loudest gunshot I'd ever heard rang out, reverberating through the night. Panic shot through me, and I slammed my head on the car roof in shock. I tossed the keys into the front seat and scrambled back to my truck. That's when I heard a gravelly voice yelling in the distance, calling out repeatedly. Then as the voice was there, it grew closer and closer. As time was passing and I could feel the adrenaline coursing through my veins, I jumped into the cab of my semi and I turned the ignition. My heart raced as I threw it into gear, my hands shaking as the engine coughed to life. I caught a glimpse of a figure standing by the trunk of the car, a short, stocky guy with wild red hair, wearing overalls and high boots, and on hand he gripped a small shovel and in the other an old hunting rifle. Our eyes met for a brief moment, and his expression was a mixture of worry and urgency. As I drove past him, he dropped the shovel and waved his arms, shouting for me to wait, but there was no way I was sticking around. I slammed on the gas, my truck lurching forward, heart pounding as I glanced in the rearview mirror. The man sprinted after my truck for a few seconds before veering back to his car, clearly desperate for me to stop, but I was not about to oblige. I sped down the road, pushing the semi faster than I should have. After a few minutes, I thought I was in the clear until I spotted headlights rapidly approaching behind me. My heart sank as the realization set in. He was on my tail. I frantically dialed 911, relaying the details as best as I could. The car behind me began honking madly, the sound piercing the stillness of the desert night. I kept driving, praying he wouldn't try to ram me off the road. After what felt like an eternity of him right in my bumper, he suddenly cut in front of me, slamming on his brakes. I nearly crashed into him when out of nowhere flashing police lights appeared ahead. The man swerved off to the right, disappearing into the darkness of the desert. Relief washed over me as I pulled over, waiting for the officer to arrive. I breathlessly recounted the bizarre encounter, but instead of chasing the guy down, the officer decided to take my statement. I was infuriated. Didn't he realize that this guy might be still out there? I urged him to leave immediately, insisting the suspect was getting away, but the cop brushed me off, assuring me they'd conduct a thorough search once backup arrived. I drove away, but they never called with any updates. Since then, I told his story countless times, and while some friends think the guy was burying bodies, I find it hard to believe. He had a small shovel, and those bags seemed too tiny for anything sinister. For my own peace of mind, I tell myself he was probably just putting a sick animal to rest. But the truth is, I've never felt comfortable driving through deserts at night again. The haunting memory lingers, and the darkness out there feels alive, filled with secrets best left buried. I'm sure you've come across those trendy videos where truckers share their daily routines and helpful tips. Well, as a younger guy in this industry, I see them all the time on TikTok and YouTube Shorts. I had to drop out of a prestigious university for personal reasons, and people often tell me I could have been so much more than just a trucker. But honestly, I've been on this road for over 2 years now, and it's not a big gig. The only real challenge is the long hours. You never truly grasp how isolation can gnaw at your mind until you experience it firsthand. My advice, make peace with your inner demons because they will haunt you during those lonely stretches. Believe me, I learned that the hard way. This particular incident happened just 3 months after I landed my first trucking job. I was still as green as they come, making a long drive from southern New Jersey to Lafayette, Indiana. A grueling 12-hour trek. It might not sound too crazy, but consider that I had just finished an 8-hour drive, and you'll see why I was feeling the strain. Determined to get my deliveries done as quickly as possible, I decided to drive through the night, aiming to arrive in Lafayette just before 3 a.m. For a while, things went smoothly. The roads were particularly empty, allowing me to push the semi a little faster than usual. But halfway into the drive, I reached for a can of Red Bull from the center console, only to realize I had forgotten to restock my supplies after the last delivery. I slammed my hand against the dashboard in frustration. Stopping to grab an energy drink was the last thing I wanted to do. The idea of falling asleep behind the wheel was equally terrifying. Reluctantly, I pulled into the first service area I spotted. What I found wasn't a service stop, but an abandoned gas station that had been turned into a rundown convenience store. Not exactly what I was hoping for. I figured I'd check it out anyway, and it was a total bust. I'd head to a nearby store I had spotted on the way. As I parked the truck and stepped inside, I was greeted by darkness. Every light was off, and the place was eerily quiet. I have expected the door to be locked, but to my surprise, it swung open. My heart raced as I scanned the room, hoping against hope that I'd find at least a drink or some snacks left behind. Just as I was about to turn back, my eyes adjusted to the darkness, and I noticed a faint glow coming from a door at the back of the store. My curiosity got the better of me, and I slowly opened it. To my shock, I found the refrigerator plugged into the wall. I hurried over and yanked the door open, only to discover it was completely empty, shelves stripped bare, as if someone had gutted the whole appliance. As I was shutting the door, I thought I heard a clatter from the main room, a noise that sent chills down my spine. I froze, listening intently. Was it just my imagination? Cautiously, I stepped back into the main area, scanning for anything out of the ordinary. Nothing. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, urging me to leave. I had no time for this nonsense. I hurried out of the store as my heart was racing and jogged to the nearby convenience shop that was thankfully open. After grabbing a drink, I dashed back to my truck, feeling a sense of relief wash over me. But as I took that one last look at the abandoned store, my stomach immediately dropped. The door was now ajar, swinging slightly in the breeze. I was sure I had just shut it behind me. Dread settled in. I needed to get back on the road and shake off this unsettling feeling. As I emerged back onto the highway, the caffeine kicked in, jolting me from my fatigue. I tried to push the bizarre encounter out of my mind, but the image of that empty refrigerator kept creeping back in. Just then, I noticed strange movements in the curtain behind me, a bellowing that sent a jolt of panic through my veins. Sweat dripped down my forehead as I watched the curtain shift. Even though I hadn't turned on the air conditioning, my heart raced. Was someone in my truck? I didn't have any weapons, so I quickly typed the nearest police station into my phone. The drive to the station felt like the longest 20 minutes of my life. I imagined whoever was in my truck reaching out to grab me, or worse, trying to take control of the vehicle. When I finally arrived, I parked as close as I could and bolted towards the police station. In mere seconds, my truck was surrounded by officers. As I opened the bag, what I saw will haunt me forever. 3 homeless individuals emerged, 2 men and a woman, all looking disheveled and wrapped in filthy blankets. One of the men brandished 2 switchblades, while the others glared at me with menacing stares, refusing to utter a word. As they were cuffed and led away, I was left with more questions than answers. What did they want, and what had they planned? The encounter lingered in my mind, a chilling reminder of the unpredictability of the road. I didn't stick around to find out. I just wanted to escape that crazy nightmare, and that's all. My name is Kevin, and I've been a trucker for various companies for nearly 15 years now. Over the years, my routine has become second nature. Pick up goods, verify their accuracy, and deliver them without a hitch. Since we're not paid by the hour, efficiency is key, and as someone who has been in the game for so long, I like to think I can outwork all the younger guys eager to grab these jobs. But pushing myself to the limit often means operating on barely any sleep, and that can lead to dangerous situations. 4 years ago, I was working for a warehouse in North Dakota. For those unfamiliar, it's one of the flattest states, making trucking a bit easier. However, that flatness also meant that skipping a few hours of sleep could be the difference between keeping my job and getting fired. On a chilly Tuesday morning in May, the start of the week brought a heavier load, meaning more work for me. Determined to knock everything out in one go, I plotted my route into Montana, planning to drive straight through without stopping to sleep. I hit the road a few hours after lunch, expecting to reach my destination by early morning. The clock ticked past midnight, and I was fighting to keep my eyes open, pushing the semi as fast as I dared. I rubbed the sleep from my eyes, willing myself to focus. And to keep myself alert, I remembered my buddy Thurston, another trucker who had introduced me to smelling salts. With just one sniff, they could wake you right up immediately. I took a big whiff, feeling the rush of adrenaline surge through me, hoping it would last until I reached my destination. But a half hour later, I was still struggling. My eyelids felt heavy, and just then, the truck drifted towards the shoulder, jolting me awake. Panic set in. I needed to pull over immediately, but the highway was deserted, with dense woods flanking either side. Slowing down, I scanned the area desperately for a place to stop, but when my headlights illuminated something odd ahead, a purple dress lay in the middle of the road. Confusion gripped me. Was I hallucinating from the exhaustion? Or what was happening exactly? I blinked rapidly, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It was real, and as I drove closer, dread began to settle in. About 200 yards further, I spotted a pair of shoes. My heart raced. What was going on? I continued to drive, praying for a safe place to pull over. My father, David, was a deeply religious man, so I clutched his old cross, hoping for protection. Just a little further, I saw more scattered clothing, some of it looking like it belonged to children. That's when the panic hit me like a wave. Something was seriously wrong. I stopped the truck and sat there, my instincts screaming at me to stay put. After a moment, curiosity got the better of me, and I stepped out to inspect a pile of clothing. The cold morning air was biting, awakening my senses and heightening my awarenesses. As I approached, I realized it was indeed kids' clothing, both boy and girl items mixed together, glancing around into the shadowy woods. I felt a chill run down my spine, and I had to keep my wits about me. This could easily be a trap, Suddenly I heard a crunching noise from my left, and I whipped around as my heart was pounding in my chest. I stood there frozen, waiting for another sound. After what felt like an eternity, a second crunch echoed from the opposite side of the road. Fear surged through me, and I sprinted back towards the truck, adrenaline propelling me forward. Just as I leaped into the cab, a child's scream shattered the silence, freezing me in place. My heart raced as I stood at the crossroad. I didn't want to confront whoever was lurking in the dark woods, but I couldn't just abandon a child in distress either. Before I could decide, another scream rang out, almost identical to the first one. My instincts kicked in even more, and without a second thought, I fired up the truck and pointed the headlights towards the woods where the sound had come from. As the beams of light cut through the darkness, I spotted 3 or 4 figures hiding behind some trees. One of them was holding a massive speaker. My stomach dropped as I realized they were trying to lure me into the woods with a fake child scream. I sat there, stunned, processing the bizarre scene unfolding before me. I reached for my phone to call the police, but before I could even start dialing, I heard a loud thump on the body of the truck, a distraction from the other direction. Fear coursed through me. I had to get out of there. I slammed the gas pedal to the floor, tearing away. From that nightmarish scene, I caught a glimpse of a figure on the other side of the road who shouted something I couldn't make out before throwing something that cracked my passenger side window. The sound echoed in my ears as I sped off into the night, the adrenaline pumping through my veins. The final hour of driving was eerily silent, my mind racing with what had just happened. There was no way in hell I was stopping to sleep anywhere near those woods. When I finally completed my delivery, I collapsed into a deep sleep, 10 hours straight. And when I woke, the first thing I did was call in the police, who promised to investigate the woods and keep me updated. In the quiet aftermath, I replayed the night in my mind, cursing myself for stepping out of the truck. I should have minded my own business, but the thought of children in the danger was too compelling to ignore. To this day, I still have no idea what those people were planning. Why didn't they rush me when they had the chance? Or what would have happened if I had run into those woods after hearing the screams? After all of these years on the road, nothing has ever come close to being as strange or downright terrifying as that experience. It was a rainy night as I drove home from my shift at the late-night diner. The night had been quiet, yet I felt an unusual burst of energy, knowing I'd need to take melatonin when I got home to finally unwind. My route was a scenic road, picturesque by day but shrouded in darkness by night, with only the occasional parking lot for nearby restaurants or shops breaking up the stretches of dense, looming forest. As I passed a familiar deli, I noticed a woman standing under a flickering light post, waving her hand frantically. I slowed down, my heart racing with a mix of concern and hesitation. She looked to be in her mid-50s, tall and thin, soaked to the bone from the rain. "Do you need a ride?" I called out. She heard over, as her voice was dripping with gratitude as she praised me for my kindness. I asked her where she was headed, and she said just up the road to town. Against my better judgment, I opened the door to let her in. As she settled into the passenger seat, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. While she seemed sweet, I couldn't ignore the unsettling gaps in her smile. She was missing several teeth. My mind raced with questions. Was she homeless? She didn't smell like it, but the rain could have masked any door. Her hair was soaked and clung to her face, which made her look even more disheveled. Still, she smiled the entire time, appearing harmless enough. We pulled up to a gas station and I figured I might as well fill up. "Do you want anything from inside?" I asked. She said, "No thanks, honey." I then went in to pay for gas and grab a few drinks. But when I returned to the parking lot, my heart dropped. The woman was gone. I scanned the area frantically, but she vanished into thin air, feeling a mix of concern and relief. I filled up my tank and continued my drive home. Once inside my apartment, which occupied the first level of a two-family house, I kicked off my wet shoes and set the drinks on the counter. I wasn't quite tired yet, so I took melatonin and I tried to settle in for the night. However, sleep eluded me, as my mind was racing with thoughts about the woman I had just picked up. Strange noises from outside my bedroom made me dismiss the sounds as my upstairs neighbor, but deep down, I wish I had been more suspicious before drifting off. I jolted awake in a dark room, a rarity after taking melatonin. Drowsy and incredibly thirsty, I reached for my water on the bedside table when I noticed a shadowy figure crouched in the corner of my bedroom, hidden behind my dresser. My heart dropped into my stomach. This had to be some hallucination. I shook my head violently, even slapping myself, but the figure stood up and walked out of the room. I was frozen in shock, unable to scream or move as panic coursed through my veins. The silence that followed was deafening. Not a sound from outside, no footsteps, not even the creak of a door. Desperately, I grabbed my phone and called my dad, breathless and panicked. I said, "Dad, I saw someone. There was someone in my room." He answered, confused, suggesting I might have just had a night terror. I stayed on the line with him as I gathered the courage to leave my bedroom. Turning on the living room lights, I scanned a small place, but I was alone. I began to think. Maybe I had imagined it all, but locked my bedroom door and forced myself back to bed, the shadows seeming to close in around me. Morning light eventually broke through the darkness and I stumbled out of bed, still shaken from the night before. I made my way to the foyer, only to find the door was already unlocked. My heart sank. Was last night real? I searched the apartment to confirm I was alone and stepped outside to my car to grab my gym bag. That's when I noticed them, damp yellow-brown stains covering the back seat, and my blanket was gone. Overwhelmed with unease, I skipped the gym and stayed locked inside my apartment, feeling genuinely disturbed. I knew I couldn't stay there much longer. The unsettling events of that night haunted me, driving me to find a new place to live within the month. That's what I did, as the fear of what could have happened was too much to bear. A lingering reminder of how a simple act of kindness can sometimes lead you into the unknown. A few months ago, I found myself in a situation I never should have agreed to, tagging along with my friend Michael to a house party during our first year of high school. I wasn't even invited, but Michael had a way of charming his way in, and I reluctantly accepted the invitation, knowing I wouldn't be able to drive home. When we arrived at the party late that night, Michael insisted I leave my phone in his car. "You could lose it," he warned, "or someone might try to grab it." I was confused but nodded, feeling a twinge of unease as we stepped into the vibrant chaos of the backyard party. Laughter and music filled the air, mingled with the smell of smoke and alcohol as groups of teens huddled together, some indulging in who knows, whatever you call it. After a couple of hours of mingling, I realized I'd had way too much to drink. My vision was a hazy blur, and I leaned against the wall for support. I checked my watch, and I saw it was either midnight or close to 1 a.m. It was definitely time to find Michael, but as I stumbled through the crowd, I couldn't spot him anywhere. I then asked a few partygoers if they had seen him, but no one could help. Frustrated, I reached into my pocket to call him, only to realize that my phone was back in the car with Michael. Panic surged through me as I faced the reality of my situation, with no way to contact anyone and the party swirling around me. I decided that my only option was to walk home alone. I remembered my house wasn't far, but the chilly fall air sent shivers down my spine as I stepped out into the darkness. I began walking, but each step felt heavier than the last. The drinks had left me dizzy and lightheaded a little bit, and I found myself lost in a whirlwind of thoughts. Why had Michael abandoned me? Why did I listen to his ridiculous idea about leaving my phone? Regret washed over me as I scolded myself for drinking too much. As I walked, fatigue set in, and I crossed my arms tightly over my chest to ward off the cold. I was absolutely desperate to get back home. I remembered hitchhiking, holding out my thumb. I watched as car after car drove past, ignoring my silent plea for help. Just as I began to lose hope, a gray truck pulled up and stopped in front of me. Relief flooded through me as I stumbled towards the vehicle. The window rolled down, revealing an older man with a scruffy beard. He asked if I needed a ride, and without thinking twice, I climbed into the truck, feeling grateful for the unexpected kindness. As we drove, he attempted to make small talk, but I was too disoriented to respond properly, only managing murmurs in reply. However, as we turned the corner onto my street, a sense of dread washed over me. Something felt off about this man. My instincts screamed that I should get out, but I couldn't bring myself to speak up. Suddenly, we drove past my house, and my heart raced with fear. I opened my mouth to tell him to stop, but before I could utter a word, he turned to me with a sinister grin. "You know," he said, smirking, "you shouldn't be drunk while hitchhiking. You'd make a very easy target." My blood ran cold as he reached over and began rubbing my leg. I was frozen in terror, paralyzed by his menacing aura, when out of nowhere, the blaring sirens of a police car pierced the night. The truck was flooded with flashing red and blue lights, and in that instant, hope surged through me. The man panicked and slammed on the brakes, fumbling to unlock the doors. I seized the moment and jumped out of the truck, running as fast as I could towards the approaching officer, breathless and shaking. I recounted everything that had just happened. The officer listened intently, but unfortunately he explained that he was looking for a gray truck involved in a theft from a store nearby. I didn't know if it was the same man or not, but I felt an overwhelming wave of gratitude for the intervention. The officer gave me a ride home, and as I sat in the passenger seat, I reflected on the terrifying encounter. I realized then how crucial it was to be responsible and aware of my surroundings, even when trying to have a good time. That night changed everything for good. I vowed never to let myself get that out of control again. It was a Memorial Day weekend, and my group of friends decided to rent a secluded lakefront house in North Carolina. A 3 hours drive from home. The property was a steal because it was in the middle of nowhere. The group included Jamie, Crystal, Rich, Adam, and me. We piled into Adam's truck, excited for what we hoped would be a perfect weekend getaway. I had found a place on Airbnb, and the big deck with a hot tub overlooking the lake was the highlight. When we arrived, the house was as picturesque as advertised, with a gravel driveway cutting through the woods, leading up to a spacious wraparound deck. The deck's view of the serene lake was stunning. We quickly unpacked, cracked open some beers, and dove into the weekend's festivities with beer pong, cornhole, and barbecue. We were loud, but with no apparent neighbors for miles. We didn't think it would be an issue. As night fell, we gathered around the fire pit, but our evening was interrupted by a woman's voice coming from the edge of the woods. She was a middle-aged woman with short hair, and she was yelling at us to turn down the music. Her rant was full of complaints about out-of-towners like us who polluted the lake and made too much noise. After her tirade, she abruptly walked back into the dark woods. We tried to laugh off the strange encounter, but it did cast a slight shadow over our carefree mood. Later, when we were enjoying the fire pit, the music suddenly stopped and a voice called out from the lake. It was a plea for help. My heart raced as I looked out at the pitch-black water. Adam and I grabbed a kayak and paddled towards the source of the cries. But as we rowed deeper into the lake, the calls seemed to fade away into the void. Panic set in as the once urgent cries were replaced by distant guttural screams from the direction of the house. We paddled frantically back to the shore, only to find the house eerily empty. Our friends, Jamie, Crystal, Rich, and others were nowhere to be found. The truck was still parked outside, and our phones had no signals at all. And desperately we drove up the road to find the nearest house, hoping for help. We arrived at a neighboring property with its lights on and rang the doorbell repeatedly. Through the window, we saw the same woman who had yelled at us earlier, standing motionless in the living room, her expression unbearable and menacing. Terrified, we abandoned the house and we were about to leave when my phone vibrated. It was Rich calling with a frantic message. Two men with axes, wearing masks, were emerging from the woods and approaching them. The girls were screaming, and Rich was on the phone with 911. The call ended abruptly, leaving us in a state of sheer panic. We waited anxiously on the side of the road until we saw the flashing lights of police cars. We led them back to our friends, who emerged from the woods, shaken but unharmed. The police conducted a search of the cabin, but there was no sign of any break-in or the men with axes. Even the cries for help in the lake seemed to have vanished into thin air. We packed up and left immediately, our nerves frayed and our trust in remote getaways shattered. Despite our efforts to get a refund from Airbnb, we only recovered part of our money. The experience left us with more questions than answers. Were we lured into a trap? Was the woman involved somehow? The terror of that night left a permanent mark on us, and none of us have ventured into such isolated places again. The memory of that night remains a haunting reminder of how quickly a perfect weekend can turn into a nightmare. It was a Memorial Day weekend of 2021, and the world was just beginning to emerge from the grip of COVID-19. People were eager to celebrate, and my friends and I were no exception. Our friend Jacob, who had the fortune of being born into wealth, had access to a luxurious boat that belonged to his dad. We were all set for a day on the water. Jacob's house was right on the bay, so our core group, Tony, Mikey, and I, met there and took the boat out to join a huge boat gathering. The bay was filled with boats, tied together in a makeshift flotilla, and people were hopping from vessel to vessel, enjoying drinks in the sun. We were all drinking heavily, including Jacob, who unfortunately had more than his fair share. As the sun began to set and the boats started to leave, it became apparent that Jacob was too intoxicated to safely operate the boat. I suggested he take a nap in the cabin, while the rest of us tried to buy time. The hours ticked by slowly, and by the time Jacob finally woke up, he seemed a bit more sober. We decided to head back, but as we navigated the bay, we noticed a boat trailing us. Jacob's anxiety spiked as we feared it was the bay police. He was careful not to speed or slow down, trying to avoid drawing any attention as we entered the canal leading to his house. The mysterious boat followed us in. Jacob's nerves were on edge, worrying about a potential DUI and the wrath of his father. The canal was no wake zone, so we had to slow down even more. The boat behind us drew closer, and we braced ourselves for an encounter with law enforcement. But as the boat passed us, we realized it wasn't the police at all. It was just a random boat, and the three men on board were staring at us with an unsettling intensity. Jacob, still on edge, couldn't help but taunt them, but they didn't respond. We all felt a growing sense of unease as the men continued to watch us until their boat vanished into the night. We tied up the boat at Jacob's dock and we went inside his house. With his parents away, we considered throwing a last-minute pool party, but by then it was too late. Instead, we decided to chill by the pool and continue drinking. Within minutes, the same boat cruised by again. The men on board gave us the same intense stare, and at this time, Jacob said nothing. The night grew darker and my memory became increasingly hazy. I must have blacked out because the next thing I remember was waking up with a severe cotton mouth in the middle of the night. My thirst was unbearable, and as I staggered into the kitchen to drink from the faucet, I was met with a chilling sight. A man in a classic black robbery outfit, complete with a ski mask, stood there, brandishing a gun. The terror I felt was overwhelming. Every fiber of my being was screaming in silent panic. The man ordered me to stay quiet and asked where the owner of the house was. My voice trembled as I told him I didn't know. He demanded to know the location of the owner's bedroom. I pointed upstairs, and he forced me to lead him up with the gun pressed against my back. As we reached the top of the stairs, I realized there were two men, not just one, both clad in the same intimidating attire. They followed me into Jacob's room, where he was asleep. The men bragged in and woke him up, their guns pointed menacingly. They demanded to know where the safe was. Jacob was absolutely terrified. Guided them to his father's room. The men forced him to call his dad to get the combination. With Jacob's dad on the line, he reluctantly provided the code. The intruders rifled through the safe, taking cash, jewelry, saving bonds, and important documents before fleeing the house. We didn't hear any vehicle leaving, suggesting they had parked far away. Despite extensive efforts to alert the community and local authorities, no one could identify the thieves. It became clear that the men on the boat had followed us to locate Jacob's house, spotting a potential target for their heist. That night remains one of the most terrifying experiences of my life. I could have been killed with a single wrong move. The fear and adrenaline from that night still haunts me, and I can't shake the feeling that those men were dangerously close to a far worse outcome. Growing up in rural Michigan, life was often a monotonous cycle of staring at trees and crops. My parents sold their property 5 years ago, but I still remember it vividly. It was a sprawling 3-acre lot with a large house and a storage building out back. When I was 13 years old, I was often left alone at home. I had earned my parents' trust due to my maturity and responsibility. One weekend, while I was immersed in a game of Vice City on my PS2, a sudden loud metallic bang jolted me from my concentration. My heart was racing all of a sudden, and I darted to every window to see what was happening, but I saw nothing until I reached the window overlooking the storage building. The door to the building was wide open. Instinctively, I grabbed the rifle from the closet and went outside, shouting into the night, "Who's there?" The darkness swallowed my voice, and there was no reply at all. I approached the door and announced that I had a gun before peeking inside. The cluttered interior, lawn equipment, a quad, and other tools could easily conceal someone. Even though I was brave for my age, the sight of the open door and the possibility of someone hiding inside sent shivers down my spine. I decided to lock the door and retreat inside the house, where I sat by the window, my gaze fixed on the storage building. The door was heavy. It couldn't have just swung open by itself. Someone had definitely opened it. I tried calling my dad, but reached his voicemail. Around that time, it was the era before texting became the norm, so leaving a message was literally my only option. As the minutes ticked by, I heard creaks from upstairs. My heart pounded in my chest. Was it my imagination, or was someone truly in the house? Determined to protect my home, I grabbed the rifle again and cautiously made my way upstairs, where I found 5 doors, 4 leading to the bedrooms and 1 to the bathroom. I knelt down on my knees to peer through the crack under the door to my parents' room and saw 2 bare feet facing away from me. The gravity of the situation hit me hard. I wasn't prepared to confront or worse, shoot someone. Panicking, I rushed back downstairs and hid in the bathroom. Desperately, I called 911, whispering every detail of the situation. The operator instructed me to stay silent and remain hidden. I heard footsteps approaching the bathroom door, stopping just outside. A deep voice broke the silence, saying, "What's up, kid?" The chilling tone is etched in my memory. Even now, I can recall it vividly. Summoning every ounce of courage, I responded loudly, "I'm on the phone with the cops right now, and they have a gun." I put the operator on speakerphone. When the intruder tried the door and found it locked, I heard him walk away, followed by the sound of the back door slamming shut. My body relaxed slightly as I waited for the police to arrive. When they finally came, I felt an immense weight lift from my shoulders. After a thorough search of the house, they confirmed the intruder was gone. He asked if I had somewhere to stay, and I decided to go to my uncle's house. He came over, spoke with the police, and then took me to his home. The most haunting part of this experience is the fact that it was my own mistake that let the intruder in. I had left the door unlocked while investigating the noise. Despite holding a rifle, I felt completely vulnerable. It was truly the most terrifying experience of my life. A stark reminder of how quickly things can go wrong and how crucial it is to always be prepared. When I was 18, my parents went away for a week-long anniversary trip, leaving me in charge of the house. My sister had already moved out, so I was alone on our isolated property, surrounded by dense woods and accessed by a dirt driveway that led to a quiet back road. The road was flanked by large properties spaced far apart, giving it a deserted feel. In our small town, everyone knew each other, and familiar faces were a common sight, whether at the gas station, grocery store, or local bars, which I had just started visiting a few years later. One evening, while my parents were away, I stopped at the gas station to fill up my car. A black Jeep Cherokee pulled up next to me, and a man with a goatee emerged. He greeted me warmly and began filling his tank. In our small town, it was pretty normal for strangers to strike up a conversation, so I didn't think much of it. When he approached me and asked for directions to the interstate, I helped him out, noting that he scribbled the directions down on a notepad rather than using his phone, which struck me as odd. He thanked me and inquired if I was from the area. I told him I had grown up there, and he mentioned he was from out of town but didn't specify where. After he finished filling up his tank and returned the nozzle, he asked my name. I told him Kate, and he complimented my name before getting back into his Jeep. I drove off first, turning left to head back home. As I approached the driveway to our property, I noticed a black Jeep Cherokee following me. He passed by as I turned into the driveway, heading in the opposite direction from where I had directed him. At first, I thought he might have simply made a wrong turn, but unease began to set in. Later that night, as I was preparing to go out with friends, I heard footsteps nearby. Since the house was surrounded by woods, it could have been any number of animals, so I ignored it and left. However, when I returned home later and was walking from my car to the house, a man's voice called out from the darkness, "Kate!" A chill ran down my spine as I rushed inside and locked the door behind me. I called my parents, who reassured me it was probably just a neighbor. I didn't mention the gas station encounter, but the next day, as I was getting ready to go out again, I heard that same unsettling call, "Kate!" And that one was coming from a distance this time. I was panicked, and I ran back inside, locked the door, and called 911. The police arrived, searched the property, and advised me to call if the situation continued. The police presence did little to ease my anxiety. I stayed inside until the next day when I had to go to work. Leaving in broad daylight gave me some relief, and thankfully, I didn't hear the voice again. But as I came home that evening, ready to collapse into bed, the terrifying voice rang out once more from the woods, saying, "Kate, never call the cops on me again, cutie." I screamed in terror and quickly got inside, calling the police once more. They came and searched the property again, and my parents suggested I stay at a friend's house for the night. I agreed, and my friend Alex offered me a place to stay. As I prepared to leave, I made sure the house was secure. However, I was about to drive away. I saw a man in a face mask outside, trying to open my car door. My heart raced as I fumbled with the ignition and sped away. I drove to Alex's house in a state of panic, crying the entire way. Alex's dad was ready to help, and together we called the police again. An officer came to Alex's house to take my statement, while others checked my parents' property once more. My parents returned the next day, and I finally felt safe again. I was convinced that the man from the gas station had followed me home, scoped out the property, and began his disturbing campaign of intimidation. This horrifying experience was a major factor in my decision to move out into my own apartment a few months later. Some people are truly dangerous and have far too much time on their hands. One night when I was around 15 or 16 years old, I found myself alone at home for reasons I can't quite recall. My entire family was away, and I was deeply engrossed in a marathon session of the StarCraft. It was a game that I was obsessed with. The thrill of battling opponents online kept me glued to my computer. With the whole house eerily silent except for the occasional clack of my keyboard, suddenly the doorbell rang twice. Annoyed at the interruption, I reluctantly left my game and hurried to the front door. I said, "Who's there?" as I always did when I was alone. A faint, tremulous voice on the other side responded, but I couldn't quite make out what it was saying. It sounded like an older woman, though. I opened the door slightly, with the storm door still closed, and saw a woman with a warm white smile. Her hands were hidden behind her back, and she asked if she could come in to use the phone. I had been taught never to let strangers into my house, regardless of their appearance or pleas. Even though it was clear that the library a few blocks away was closed, I directed her there, hoping she'd leave. Her smile remained unchanged, but her tone grew sharper. Then all of a sudden she started saying it's very rude to turn away an old lady asking for help. Her words, combined with the unsettling smile, sent shivers down my spine. I slowly began to close the door, mumbling apologies, but she just stood there, her eerie grin fixed on her face. Back inside, I tried to shake off the weird encounter and return to my game, but then I heard a faint clinking sound coming from my window, a metallic tapping that was impossible to ignore. The window right in front of my desk was covered by a blind, so I couldn't see what was making the noise, but the thought that it might be the woman from the front door made my heart race. I turned off the sound on my computer, completely losing interest in my game. The tapping continued persistently. Overwhelmed by fear, I decided to leave the room and hide in the darkness of the living room. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, the doorbell rang again. My unease turned into outright dread. I tried to convince myself that the woman was harmless, but when the doorbell rang repeatedly, my nerves were on edge. I finally decided to check again, but this time it wasn't a woman. Instead, a man stood outside, looking younger but with a disheveled appearance. He claimed to be the son of the woman I just seen, explaining she had dementia and wandered off. Feeling a pang of guilt, I told him she might be in my backyard and let him check. But when I looked out the back window, expecting to see him searching, I found nothing. No sign of him or his mother. The whole situation felt increasingly bizarre. Later that night, as I lay in bed with the TV on for background noise, the tapping on the window returned. I hesitated but eventually peeked through the blind. To my horror, I saw the same woman outside, now holding a kitchen knife and tapping it against the glass. My blood ran cold, and I quickly shut the blind and retreated to my bed, trying to convince myself it was all a nightmare. Then came a barrage of doorbell rings, 4 times in quick succession. The clinking on the window had stopped, and the whole scenario felt like it was spiraling into a terrifying ordeal. I chose to ignore the doorbell, hoping the intruders would just leave. I waited in the dark, my anxiety mounting, until the sounds finally ceased. The next morning, I recounted the events to my father. He reassured me that I did the right thing by not opening the door. Everyone agreed that it sounded like a potential robbery attempt. While it was possible that the woman did have dementia and the man was genuinely concerned, the whole encounter seemed too calculated. Why did he want to enter the house? How did he know about the woman at my door? And why didn't he search the backyard as he was told? A week later, something happened that brought the whole ordeal back to mind. My friend Cody had asked me to watch his Pomsky Theo. Theo was barking incessantly at something outside, so I went to the back door to let him out. As I approached, I realized someone was trying to open the door from the outside. Through the screen, I saw an unfamiliar, scruffy man staring back at me. He asked if I had seen Melissa, Cody's younger sister. The man looked to be in his mid-50s and was filthy, not someone who seemed likely to be associated with someone in their 20s. I told him to leave immediately, mentioning the security cameras. He left right away, but Cody later confirmed that neither her nor her sister recognized the man. The experience was unsettling and it left me shaken. The fact that this stranger targeted a place where he had no connection and tried to gain entry through a back door was deeply disturbing. It made me realize just how crucial it is to keep doors locked, to always be cautious of anyone who seems out of place. When things hit the fan with my parents, I had to scramble for a new place to live. I was desperate and crashing on friends' couches wasn't a long-term solution. I scoured every roommate and apartment app I could find, hoping to stumble upon something decent. That's when I came across an ad from a guy named Luke. He was renting out a room in his 3-bedroom. one-story house for $1,200 a month. It sounded like a great deal, especially since he mentioned he'd often be out, leaving the place almost entirely to me. The only catch were some firm house rules: no parties, no large gatherings, no drinking in the living room, and absolutely no access to the basement. The rules seemed reasonable enough, and when I went to check out the place, it was exactly what I needed. Luke, however, struck me as a bit of a recluse. He was quiet and awkward, stumbling over his words. His nervous demeanor was unsettling, but didn't raise immediate red flags. The house itself was in great shape, with a spacious open floor plan. The bedroom was already furnished, and he even handed me a key to lock my door when he wasn't around, which felt like a nice touch. But things quickly grew strange. Despite his claim of being out most of the time, his car was always in the driveway. At night, I started hearing odd noises, footsteps, doors creaking, banging sounds coming from the basement. One night, when I ventured out to use the bathroom, I noticed the basement door was ajar. Peering down the stairs, I saw a dim light flickering from below and heard disturbing banging noises. Then Luke appeared at the bottom of the stairs, his face twisted into an annoyed scowl. He told me to shut the basement door, and I complied. Though the whole encounter left me feeling uneasy, things took a darker turn when I came home to find my bedroom door unlocked. I always kept it locked, and some of my belongings seemed to have been rifled through. My clothes were no longer neatly stacked, and the closet door was slightly ajar. Confronting Luke about this felt urgent, but when I knocked on his door, he didn't answer. His car was in the driveway, so he had to be home. My frustration grew eerie, but I let it go for the moment. Later, as I was unwinding in my room, I heard a door to Luke's room open. Seizing the chance, I went to confront him. I caught him just as he was about to leave the house. When I asked him if he had entered my room, he denied it with a blank stare and claimed I had the only key. He hastily left, leaving me alone more alarmed and confused. That night, I decided to investigate the basement myself. With Luke's car gone, I ventured downstairs, flashlight in hand. The basement was musty and small, with an unpleasant odor that grew stronger as I approached a locked door in the corner. I did not dare open it. Instead, I quickly scanned the room, finding nothing of note, and went back upstairs. The real shock came the following morning. I awoke to find Luke leaning over my bed, staring at me in the dim light. My scream shattered the silence, and he responded with a shushing gesture, asking if I had been in the basement. I was horrified and demanded to know how he got into my locked room. He didn't answer, instead simply stating that I should find other living arrangements before exiting. Panicked and shaken, I packed up my things immediately. I wasn't about to stay another night. I banged on his door, demanding half of my rent money back. Luke's response was unsettling as his presence. He handed me a small stack of 100 bells through a crack in the door. I grabbed the cash and fled, spending that night in my car. The next day, I returned to my parents' house. I explained the bizarre and frightening ordeal, and to my surprise, they were more welcoming than they had ever been. I stayed with them for a while before moving out again, but our relationship had mended. The whole experience taught me to be extremely cautious when choosing a roommate. Trust your instincts and always do thorough checks. Some red flags aren't always easy to spot until it's almost too late. During my junior year of college, I moved into an off-campus student apartment building. My new roommate assigned by the school was a guy named David. At first, he seemed like a genuinely nice guy, friendly, polite, and always smiling and engaging in small talk. But it didn't take long for oddities to surface. It started subtly. David seemed unusually interested in my personal life, often lingering in my room and preying into my belongings with a familiarity that felt off. I initially brushed it off as harmless curiosity, but his behavior grew increasingly unsettling. Strange noises began to emanate from his room late at night. Muffled talking, shuffling sounds. I told myself it was just him watching TV or talking on the phone, but deep down something felt wrong. One sleepless night, driven by the eerie noises, I decided to investigate. I crept down the hallway, my heart pounding, and pressed my ear against David's door. I could hear him whispering to himself in a low, indecipherable murmur. Then, just as abruptly the whispering stopped, the silence was suffocating until David's voice pierced through it, calling my name. Panic surged through me. Did he know I was outside his door? I quickly retreated to my room, unable to shake the feeling of dread. The next day, the unsettling noises persisted, heightening my paranoia. David's behavior grew even more peculiar. Furtive glances, odd movements, One night, I was jolted awake by the sound of whispering right outside my door. I pressed my ear against it again, and as before, the whispering ceased abruptly. David's voice called my name once more. This time, I responded, but he only walked away, leaving me increasingly disturbed. The following night, I was again awakened by the sound of my bedroom door closing and David's footsteps fading down the hallway. Frustration and fear reached their peak. I decided it was time to confront David about his apparent sleepwalking, asking if he had any sleep disorders. He hesitated, but admitted he sometimes sleepwalks. I was not convinced though. Determined to uncover the truth, I knew I had to search David's room for clues. So I waited until he was out and I sneaked into his room, rifling through drawers and closets with mounting urgency. Just as I was about to give up, I discovered a small, inconspicuous drawer hidden at the back of his closet. When I opened it, my blood ran cold. Inside were dozens of photographs, most of them showing me asleep, taken from various angles, some so close I could see individual pores and strands of hair. Alongside my images were pictures of another young man, presumably his previous roommate. A wave of nausea washed over me as I realized the horrifying truth. David had been secretly photographing me while I slept. The invasion of privacy was beyond disturbing. I knew I needed to act, but confronting David directly was too dangerous. Fearing for my safety, I took a photo of the disturbing evidence and pocketed a few of the pictures. The next day, I presented the evidence to the students' house and department. They were shocked and assured me they would handle the situation. I was quickly reassigned to a new apartment with a more typical roommate. I never saw David again, and the incident remained a haunting memory. Years later, I still shudder at the thought of those chilling photographs and David's unnerving whispering. I never discovered who the other man in the photos was, perhaps David's previous victim, but I'll never know. This experience taught me to trust my instincts and be cautious about who I live with, as some horrors are more real than we ever want to believe. At 23 years old, I found myself in a new state for work and in need of an affordable place to stay. Despite my parents' reservations, I posted roommate requests on every site I could think of: Facebook, Craigslist, Twitter, and even a local subreddit. A man named Rob reached out through Facebook offering a room in his house. His pictures seemed normal enough, and our FaceTime call confirmed that the place was decent, a modest house in town, just a short drive from my new office. Rob's initial friendliness seemed genuine. He gave me a virtual tour of his home and assured me he owned it outright. The house was in a convenient location and his terms were fair. Everything seemed to fall into place seamlessly, so I decided to move in a week later. Rob greeted me outside when I arrived, handing me a key. The first thing I noticed was his height. He was quite short, eye level with me. He helped me carry in my things and showed me to my room, which was already furnished. He explained that a previous tenant had recently moved out and that I was free to replace any items as I saw fit. The day was spent unpacking and getting settled. Rob made an effort to be welcoming, though I didn't sense anything particularly unsettling yet. The following day, he offered to drive me around town to familiarize me with the area. While I appreciated the gesture, I was hesitant about spending more time with him. Rob suggested lunch, but I wasn't hungry. He proposed drinks instead, which I declined, stating I didn't drink on work nights. His insistence felt oddly persistent, and I sensed a shift in his demeanor when I repeatedly turned him down. He became noticeably quiet and withdrawn, which left me feeling uneasy. As the week progressed, I noticed something disconcerting. When I returned home after one day, I discovered that my laundry hamper had been tampered with. My clothes were not as I had left them, and a pair of my underwear was missing. My heart raced with an uncomfortable thought. Could Rob be involved? I didn't want to jump to conclusions or confront him just yet, but the absence of a lock on my bedroom door made me uneasy. I bought a lockable doorknob and installed it while Rob was out, planning to explain my actions to him later. That night, I was jolted awake by banging on my bedroom door. Rob's voice called my name, clearly agitated. Terrifyingly, I decided to stay silent, pretending to be asleep. Rob's angry demands were muffled, but his frustration was palpable. The next morning, I was bombarded with texts from Rob insisting we needed to talk about the doorknob. I responded, apologizing and explaining that I felt safer with privacy. Rob's tone was cold and demanding, insisting that the old doorknob be reinstalled. His reaction was unnerving. How could he know about the change? Reluctantly, I removed the new doorknob and reinstalled the old one. The situation grew even more sinister when a young woman arrived at my door. while Rob was out. She warned me to leave immediately, revealing that Rob had multiple restraining orders from different women and was known for being a dangerous stalker. I was paralyzed with fear, unable to believe the gravity of what she was saying. She assured me she'd help me in any way she could and gave me her contact information before leaving. With her help, I found a new place across town, an available studio apartment. As I packed my belongings and prepared to move, I texted Rob, fabricating a story about a family emergency that required me to leave. When Rob returned, I told him I was moving out and requested a refund of my payment. He agreed to return the money after he visited the bank, which provided some relief. An hour later, Rob knocked on my door again, asking if anyone had warned me about him. I lied, insisting I knew nothing. His demeanor shifted from curious to suspicious, but I stuck to my story. That night, I woke in terror to find Rob sitting at the end of my bed, his presence like a nightmare made flesh. He covered my mouth and whispered to me, saying, "I know someone said something to you." His touch was both chilling and invasive as he tried to calm me. Claiming he meant no harm, I scrambled out of bed and fled to the door, while Rob's enraged shouts followed me. I ran outside, dialing 911, and hid in the bushes until the police arrived. The officers questioned Rob and listened to my account of the events. They observed his attempts to appear normal, but one officer discreetly informed me that Rob had been arrested before for similar incidents. Despite Rob's denial of wrongdoing, I managed to retrieve my belongings with the police's help. I insisted on getting my money back, which he begrudgingly provided. After a harrowing night at a hotel, I moved into the studio apartment the next day. The experience left me shaken and profoundly cautious. I vowed never to live with a man I didn't know intimately again. The ordeal served as a harsh reminder of how quickly situations can escalate and the importance of trusting one's instincts when it comes to personal safety. When my father turned 50, he fulfilled a lifelong dream by getting an African gray parrot. He'd always adored parrots, and I was thrilled for him to finally have one after his retirement. He named the bird Kevin. Over the years, my father diligently taught Kevin a wide range of words and even trained him to understand the meanings behind them. Simple things like hello, what's up, food, thank you, and good. Kevin became more than just a pet. He was a companion, a living piece of my dad's legacy. When my father passed away at the age of 70 years old, it fell to my siblings and I to decide Kevin's fate. My brother and sister, along with their spouses, were unwilling to take on the responsibility of caring for him. But I couldn't bear the thought of sending Kevin to a new home. He was a tangible connection to my father, his best friend. So I took him in. I set up Kevin's cage in the den, the lowest level of my house since it doesn't have a basement. Kevin was a moderately noisy bird, often chattering away during the day. To quiet him at night, I would cover his cage with a blanket. I'd sit in the den, watching TV to keep him company. And around 10 p.m., I'd head to bed, allowing him to settle down for the night. One December night, as I tried to sleep, Kevin began making an unusual amount of noises. His squawking was different from his typical chatter and persisted well past midnight. It was clear something was bothering him. I went downstairs to check on him, only to find him wide awake and making his usual noises. "Hello, what's up?" and his own name, while bobbling his head and moving his body as if dancing. I tried feeding him, but he ignored the food. Growing increasingly frustrated, I covered his cage with the blanket again, hoping this would calm him. When that didn't work, I returned downstairs, feeling a mix of confusion and irritation. It was then that I heard a faint sound coming from the pantry closet. Just a few feet away from Kevin's cage, I approached the pantry, hovering my hand over the light switch. As soon as I flicked it on, the glass panel of the pantry door revealed a shadowy figure inside. A surge of adrenaline jolted me into action. My heart raced as I threw open the door and charged into the pantry, confronting the intruder, a disheveled man in his 50s, with a rank odor that matched his appearance. I grabbed him and tackled him to the floor. His attempts to fight back were futile. With a primal shout, I managed to restrain him in what could only be described as a choke hold. The man tried to claw at my face, but I kept him subdued, landing blows to prevent him from getting the upper hand. Meanwhile, Kevin's screeches grew louder and more frantic, as if urging me on. Finally, when the intruder seemed too weak to resist, I sprinted to the nearest phone and dialed 911. As I stayed on the line, keeping him pinned, Kevin's chaotic racket filled the house, a discordant symphony that kept me grounded in the reality of the situation. The police arrived swiftly, and the man was taken into custody. Despite his arrest, it turned out he had nothing of value. Being homeless and without any means to repay or compensate, He had rummaged through my pantry, opening jars of peanut butter and boxes of cookies, but thankfully he hadn't managed to take anything more. I'm profoundly grateful to Kevin for his vigilance that night. The experience left me with a deep sense of connection to my father, knowing that his spirit, embodied in Kevin, played a crucial role in protecting me. It was as if a part of my dad had been watching over me, ensuring that I was safe. I was still in college when something terrifying happened to me at a party school in upstate New York. Though I wasn't in a sorority, I was known for attending plenty of fraternity parties. During this time, I was in the midst of a heavy drinking phase, but I figured it was good to get it all out of my system. One night, my friends Deanna and Kayla convinced me to head up a Kappa Sigma party. I sometimes rallied myself to go out. We pre-gamed heavily at our off-campus house, where I lived with 3 other girls. The house was just a casual place for friends, not a sorority or a team residence. After we drank enough to loosen up, we called an Uber and headed to the frat house, where I lost track of my memories after arriving. I vaguely remember some frat guys hanging out outside, the DJ pumping music in the living room, and beer pong tables set up in the kitchen. Later, I found out I had played beer pong with a random guy and ended up chatting with him for a while. But the next thing I knew, I was waking up disoriented, lying on the grass beside a dark road. My head pounded as I tried to piece together how I had ended up there. It was pitch black, and I felt cold and alone. Lying among the trees near a wooded area far from campus, I patted my pockets in a panic, realizing I had lost my phone and my crossbody bag. Fear gripped me tightly. I had no way to call for help or even figure out where I was. Desperately, I stumbled down the road towards some distant light posts. As I waited, my heart raced, and I began to wonder if I would be stuck there all night. After what felt like an eternity, I finally saw headlights approaching. I stepped into the road, waving my arms and jumping to get the driver's attention. The car slowed to a stop, and the driver, a man who looked to be in his mid-30s, rolled down his window. I told him I was stranded and needed a ride home. He invited me in, and I felt a small wave of relief wash over me. But as we drove, I quickly realized that my relief was misplaced. The man asked me what had happened, and without thinking, I shared my unfortunate story about the party and losing my phone. Looking back, I should have kept my mouth shut. The driver's expression shifted. I could tell he was sizing me up. When I asked how far we had left to go, he responded with a disconcerting calmness, saying we were almost there, and we remained on that dark, empty road. My gut twisted with unease. Suddenly his tone changed as he asked, "What color underwear are you wearing?" His hand slid onto my knee, sending a wave of panic through me. I recoiled, pleading with him not to hurt me. Then as I'm saying that, all of a sudden he said, "Why would I hurt you?" But I didn't trust him at all. Just then, he pulled the car onto the grass and parked. That was my chance. I flung open the door and bolted into the woods, adrenaline coursing through my veins. I sprinted blindly, desperate to get away. Once I was hidden among the trees, I heard him yelling, "Where are you? I just want to have some fun." I pressed my hands over my mouth, stifling my breath in sheer terror. I waited in the darkness until I heard the sound of his car door slamming tires screech away. My heart was racing, and I slowly made my way back to the road, praying he was truly gone. I knew I needed help, but felt utterly helpless and alone. After a few agonizing moments, another set of headlights appeared in the distance. I waited until I was sure it was a different car before leaping into the road, waving my arms frantically. The driver, a man who looked a bit older, stopped, and I jumped into the back seat, still trembling from the last encounter. I could hardly speak now. I was just only answering his questions about what happened. Thankfully, he dropped me off at my house around 4 a.m. My friends were still awake, clearly worried about me, and they had my phone and bag. They had been contemplating calling the police if I hadn't returned, and no one knew who I had lived with, and the guy I had spoken with at the party claimed he didn't leave with me. In fact, there was no solid proof I had lived with anyone at all. I had no explanation for how I ended up on the side of that road, and the fear of that night haunted me long after. I made a vow to cut back on drinking and never again put myself in a position where I would have to rely on a stranger for a ride home. The experience changed everything, leaving me shaken but grateful to have escaped that terrifying situation. I was hitchhiking from Life-A Germany to Paris, eager to retrieve my paintings from an exhibition. It was a sunny October day, and as a 29-year-old traveler, I felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. When I met a French man at a gas station, he was unshaven and scruffy, yet he agreed to give me a ride to Paris. The warmth of that day was deceptive, hiding the dark turn my adventure would soon take. As we drove along the highway, small talk flowed until he suddenly reached over my lap and opened the glove compartment. He pulled out a stack of passports, 4 of them each belonging to a young woman. He told me chilling stories of each one. His girlfriend who died in a motorcycle accident, another who perished in a car crash, a third who succumbed to a brain tumor, and the last who fell off a shore. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. This man was cursed with a dark history. Unease settled over me like a heavy fog, but I stayed silent, unsure of how to react. The driver then announced he wanted to take a shortcut to Paris, and I felt a sense of dread washing over me as he said that. This wasn't a charming detour I'd imagined. Instead, we veered off the main road onto a narrow dirt path, surrounded by dense woods. My heart raced as the forest closed in around us, shrouding us in darkness. At 5 p.m., as the sun began to set, he abruptly declared, "I don't want to speak English anymore." Cutting off all communication, the tension in the car escalated, and my instincts screamed for me to escape. I was aware of my hand inching towards the door handle, a move that surely didn't go unnoticed. The car slowed to a crawl, and my mind raced with panic. Was he going to hurt me? Did he have a weapon? I don't know, but my heart was pounding and adrenaline was coursing through me. In that moment of terror, a strange resolve formed within me. I wouldn't be a helpless victim. I was strong and determined. I had traveled enough to recognize the primal dance of fear and power that unfolded between us. If he wanted to threaten me, he'd find I was not easily subdued. As the car continued to inch forward, I felt a shift in the atmosphere. Perhaps he sensed my defiance because suddenly he accelerated, breaking free from the suffocating woods. I watched the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of red and orange, grateful to be emergent from the grip of those dark trees. He glanced over and asked if I wanted to spend the night at his house. Images of a filthy torture chamber flickered through my mind, and I politely declined. My silence had been my shield, keeping me safe during that eerie journey. Maybe if I had spoken out of turn, my face could have been different. I stepped out onto the roadside as night enveloped the world around me. Watching him drive away, confusion and exhaustion washed over me, and I found a spot to sleep under the stars, too drained to process the night's events. Fast forward 20 years. When I was teaching English to a German business student at a coffee shop in Germany, our conversation turned to hitchhiking, and I recounted my harrowing tale. My student's eyes widened as he pulled out his smartphone, Googling French serial killers. When he showed me a photo, I felt my blood run cold. It was him, Patrice Allegra, the man who had driven me through the woods all those years. Back then, he was known for leaving the bodies of young women along French highways, and my heart sank as I recalled my narrow escape. I wished I had gone to the police, but the language barrier had kept me silent. What if I could have helped stopping him? The weight of that possibility hung heavy on my consciousness, haunting me ever since. Perhaps the souls of those lost girls had escaped with me that night, desperate to flee the darkness of the forest. Summer is without a doubt the greatest season. I'd gladly defend that claim against anyone. My passion for summer isn't about wild parties or heavy drinking. It is all about the beauty of nature, the warm weather, and the great outdoors. When the heat rolls in, you'll find me outside far more than in, soaking up every moment. One warm June night a few summers ago, when I was around 17 or 18 years old, I decided to embrace the summer by camping in a massive nature preserve near my house. This place was enormous, almost 1,000 acres. filled with the dense woods and hidden secrets that I hadn't fully explored. My two friends, Chuck and Jackson, joined me for what we thought would be an unforgettable night in the wilderness. And for sure, camping was technically illegal there, but we were confident we wouldn't get caught. Chuck was the camping expert among us, the kind of guy who could have easily played the role of a Boy Scout. He knew countless nuts and survival tricks. Jackson, on the other hand, was our go-to guy for drinks. If he wasn't supplying the booze, he wasn't happy. I remember the warm breeze rustling through my hair as we packed Jackson's car, the ideal summer weather wrapping us in a cozy embrace. After a few beers, we set off into the woods around 11:30 p.m., the darkness creeping in as we lugged our camping gear along the winding paths. The alcohol was starting to hit me, adding a haze to my senses, but thankfully, Chuck had brought a powerful flashlight to cut through the darkness. Still, I couldn't shake the eerie feeling that came with wandering through thick woods at that hour. Eventually, we stumbled upon a small clearing that seemed perfect for camping. We set up our tent as Chuck directed, then focused on starting a fire. After a little effort, we had a crackling blaze, and Jackson produced a portable speaker, filling the air with music. The vibe was just right, and we spent the next couple of hours laughing and drinking, our worries fading away under the stars. But then, just as we were settling in, a deafening whistle shattered the night, sending chill down my spine. It was an eerie sound, loud, yet distant, cutting through the warm summer air like a knife. Jackson quickly switched off the music, and the three of us exchanged worried glances. A cold wave of fear washing over us. My heart raced and I strained to listen. The woods, usually alive with the sounds of nature, had fallen eerily silent. Chuck finally broke the tense silence, urging us to pack up and leave. But Jackson and I hesitated. Sure, staying put felt wrong, but rushing off into the darkness seemed just as dangerous. Time ticked by and we decided to hunker down for a while longer, though every instinct screamed for us to run. Chuck insisted we keep the fire going. It could ward off dangerous animals. As the reality of our situation set in, I realized we were miles from civilian, deep in the woods at 3 a.m., with something unknown lurking nearby. Minutes dragged on, and our conversation dropped to hushed whispers. Just when I thought we might finally relax, something small darted across Jackson's shoulder, landing with a thud in the fire. A firecracker. Panic surged through me as I screamed, and Chuck bolted upright, heart racing as he drove into the darkness, his flashlight beam slicing through the night. Jackson and I scrambled after him, leaving all our gear behind in our frantic escape. We sprinted through the woods, adrenaline fueling our flight. The shadows seemed to stretch and creep around us, and Jackson suddenly doubled over, sick from fear. Chuck turned off his flashlight, and we stood there, gasping for breath, straining to hear if anyone had followed us. To our surprise, it seemed like no one was on our trail, but I was still shaking to my core. Why would anyone throw a firecracker at us in the middle of the woods? Jackson wanted to get out of there and never look back, but Chuck was insistent. He couldn't leave his gear behind, and the fire was still burning. I was incredulous. How could he be worried about a campfire when we just escaped something terrifying? But eventually, I agreed we should at least check on our campsite, convinced that whoever had thrown the firecracker was just a prankster. Chuck expertly retraced our steps, and soon we could see the faint glow of the fire in the distance. As we crept closer, a wave of dread washed over me, especially when Jackson raised a hand to stop us. A look of horror painted his face as he pointed ahead. I squinted, and what I saw will forever haunt my nightmares. 3 figures sat motionless in our chairs, like lifeless statues. One had his face turned towards us, mouth hanging open, devoid of life. Panic got the most of me, and I was asking myself these couple of questions, just saying, what were they doing and why weren't they moving? We stood frozen, horrified, until Jackson accidentally kicked a rock, letting out a curse. In an instant, the fire extinguished, snuffed out as if someone had thrown a blanket over it. We didn't waste a moment. We bolted into the darkness, now hearing footsteps crashing behind us. Fear propelled us through the woods, and we ran faster than I ever thought possible until we burst out into the open, reaching Jackson's car. By some miracle, we weren't followed, but the silence that enveloped us on the drive back was thick with unspoken terror. The next day, Chuck insisted we return to the campsite in daylight to collect his belongings. Jackson flat out refused, but I reluctantly agreed to go with Chuck. After searching, we found the campsite seemingly untouched until we got closer and were hit with a putrid smell emanating from Chuck's tent. He unzipped it, revealing a decaying rat inside. The sight so sickening that I know right then and there that I'd never return to that cursed preserve again.